The United States mission in Benghazi, Libya, was attacked on September 11, 2012. As Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State at the time, she is at the heart of the cover-up investigation.
Tonight, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge begins with a look at the mistakes and miscalculations that led to the deaths of 4 Americans.
In the year leading up to the September 12 terrorist attack, there were 234 security incidents in Libya, 50 of which took place in Benghazi, including this assassination attempt on the British ambassador, as well as an IED attack that blew a hole in the U.S. consulate's perimeter wall. The emails from Ambassador Chris Stevens were only now released to the Select Committee.
He even joked in an email, maybe we should ask another government to pay for our security upgrades because our government isn't willing to do it.
2 months before the attack that killed 4 Americans, this cable shows Stevens requested another 13 security personnel to help him safely travel the country. The request was turned down by Mrs. Clinton's deputy, Patrick Kennedy. A State Department security officer later told Senate investigators that he was so short-staffed that he had to choose between guarding the Tripoli airport, their lifeline to the outside world, and sending a team with Stevens to Benghazi on September 11th. In August 2012, it had become so violent, there was an emergency meeting with the CIA whose secret annex was across town. This classified cable warned the consulate could not withstand a, quote, coordinated assault, and there were, quote, 10 Islamist militias and al-Qaeda training camps within Benghazi. Yet, like other requests, no security was added. And on September 11th, when the attack came in 3 phases, documents suggest the local guard force Blue Mountain, Libya, was operating without a valid license because of a contract dispute. And CIA security told Fox's Brett Baier they were ordered not to immediately help.
If I gave you that 30 minutes back and I gave you some air power, would Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith be alive today?
Yes, to me, if without the delay, they would still be alive.
In the months before his death, Ambassador Stevens talked about being worried about what he called the never-ending security threats in Benghazi, specifically mentioned the rise in Islamic extremism, the growing al-Qaeda presence in Libya, and said he was on an al-Qaeda hit list.
Green Beret Commander Lieutenant Colonel Andy Wood was one of the top American security officials in Libya. Based in Tripoli, he met with Ambassador Stevens. The last time he went to Benghazi was in June, just 3 months before the attack. While he was there, al-Qaeda tried to assassinate the British ambassador. Wood says to him it came as no surprise because al-Qaeda, using a familiar tactic, had stated their intent in an online posting, saying they would attack the Red Cross, the British, and then the Americans in Benghazi.
And you watched as they attacked the Red Cross and the British mission, and the only ones left
were us. They made good on 2 out of the 3 promises. It was a matter of time till they captured the 3rd one.
And Washington was aware of that?
They knew we monitored it. We included that in our reports to both State Department and DOD.
Andy Wood told us he raised his concerns directly with Ambassador Stevens 3 months before the U.S. compound was overrun.
I made it known in a country team meeting, you are going to get attacked. You are going to get attacked in Benghazi. It's going to happen. You need to change your security profile.
Shut down
Shut down operations. Move out temporarily or change locations within the city. Do something to break up the profile because you are being targeted. They're watching you. The attack cycle is such that they're in their final planning stages.
Wait a minute. You said they're in the final planning stages of an attack on the American mission in Benghazi.
It was apparent to me that that was the case. Reading all these other attacks that were occurring, I could see what they were staging up to. It was obvious. You had one option: leave Benghazi or you will be killed.
Greg Hicks, who testified before Congress earlier this year, was Ambassador Stevens' deputy, based in Tripoli. A 22-year veteran of the Foreign Service with an impeccable reputation.
And in that environment, you were asking for more security assets, and you were not getting them.
That's right.
Did you fight that?
I was in the process of trying to frame a 3rd request, but it was not allowed to go forward.
So why didn't you get the help that you needed and that you asked for?
I really really don't know. I, in fact, would like to know the answer to that question.
In the months prior to the attack, Ambassador Stevens approved a series of detailed cables to Washington, specifically mentioning, among other things, the Al-Qaeda flag has been spotted several times, flying over government buildings.
Hi, Congressman Dennis Kucinich here. I just got off the phone with a very well-known talk show host from Cleveland, Mike Trivisano, who told me about calls that he's been getting from people who are concerned about the fact that there's a Al-Qaeda flag flying over the courthouse in Benghazi in Libya, put there by the same group that we helped to oust the Gaddafi regime. What is going on in America? On one hand, we have soldiers dying in Afghanistan fighting Al-Qaeda. On the other hand, we just helped a group of people take over Libya, and the Al-Qaeda flag is flying over their capital city headquarters. What are we doing? It's time for America to get its story and its priorities straight about what we stand for as a nation. It's time to get out of all these wars and all of these conflicts where we think we can play both sides against the middle, and it usually ends up with U.S. soldiers getting killed. It's time for us to bring our troops home and take care of things here at home. We should really honor those who serve by having a foreign policy that is straight, that speaks directly to the concerns of the American people, that is mindful of the fact that we can't tell the whole world what to do, and we have an obligation to get our own house in order.
When the attack began on the evening of September 11th, Ambassador Stevens immediately called Greg Hicks, who was back in Tripoli.
Ambassador said that the consulate's under attack, and then the line cut.
Do you remember the sound of his voice?
Oh yeah, it's indelibly imprinted on my mind.
How did he sound?
He sounded frightened.
About 30 minutes into the attack, a quick reaction force from the CIA annex ignored orders to wait and raced to the compound, at times running and shooting their way through the streets just to get there. Inside the compound, they repelled a force of as many as 60 armed terrorists and managed to save 5 American lives and recover the body of Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith. They were forced to fight their way out before they could find the ambassador. The same force that had gone to the compound was now defending the CIA annex. Hours later, they were joined by a small team of Americans from Tripoli. From defensive positions on these rooftops, the Americans fought back a professional enemy. In a final wave of intense fighting, just after 5 a.m., the attackers unleashed a barrage of mortars. 3 of them slammed into this roof, killing former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty.
They hit that roof 3 times.
They hit those roofs 3 times.
In the dock.
Yeah, that's getting the basketball through the hoop over your shoulder.
What does it take to pull off an attack like that?
Coordination, planning, training, experienced personnel. They practiced those things. They knew what they were doing. That was a well-executed attack.
And the lingering question is why no larger military response ever crossed the border into Libya. Something Greg Hicks realized wasn't going to happen just an hour into the attack.
You have this conversation with the defense attaché. You ask him what military assets are on their way, and he says,
effectively, they're not. And for a moment, I just felt lost. I just couldn't believe the answer. And then I made the call to the annex chief. I told him, listen, you've got to tell those guys there may not be any help coming.
That's a tough thing to understand. Why?
It just is. For us, for the people that go out onto the edge to represent our country, we believe that if we get in trouble, they're coming to get us. our back is covered. To hear that it's not, it's a terrible, terrible experience.
4 Americans were killed, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. We wanted to know who did it. We wanted to know why. In the days following the attacks, we were fed a certain story over and over.
Yesterday, our U.S. diplomatic post in Benghazi, Libya, was attacked. Heavily armed militants assaulted the compound and set fire to our buildings. American and Libyan security personnel battled the attackers together. 4 Americans were killed. They included Sean Smith, a Foreign Service Information Management Officer, and our ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens. We are still making next of kin notifications for the other 2 individuals. This is an attack that should shock the conscience of people of all faiths around the world. We condemn in the strongest terms this senseless act of violence, and we send our prayers to the families, friends, and colleagues of those we've lost. We are working to determine the precise motivations and methods of those who carried out this assault. Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior along with the protest that took place at our embassy in Cairo yesterday as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. America's commitment to religious tolerance goes back to the very beginning of our nation. But let me be clear, there is no justification for this. None. Violence like this is no way to honor religion or faith. And as long as there are those who would take innocent life in the name of God, the world will never know a true and lasting peace.
The White House linked the violence to spontaneous protests against an anti-Muslim video, even as evidence emerged of a planned terrorist attack.
This is a spontaneous reaction to a video that began spontaneously in Benghazi. It's not a premeditated response to what had transpired some hours earlier in Cairo. There was a hateful video that was disseminated on the internet.
The crude and disgusting video sparked outrage throughout the Muslim world.
To us, to me personally, this video is disgusting and reprehensible.
This is a fairly volatile situation, and it is in response not to United States policy, not to, obviously, the administration, not to the American people. It is in response to a video. These protests were in reaction to a video that had spread to the region.
At Benghazi? What happened?
We certainly don't know. We don't know otherwise. We have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack. The unrest we've seen around the region has been in reaction to a video that many Muslims find offensive.
This has been a difficult week for the State Department and for our country. We've seen the heavy assault on our post in Benghazi that took the lives of those brave men. We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with.
Yes, a crude and disgusting video called Innocence of Muslims was to blame for the attacks in Benghazi, except, of course, that it was not. About a month after the attacks, the State Department admitted that there were no protests in Libya over that anti-Muslim video. One woman still looking for answers is Pat Smith. Her son, State Department Information Officer Sean Smith, was one of the 4 Americans killed. Pat, thanks so much for being here. I know this is not an easy time. How are you holding up?
Terrible. I cry every night. I don't sleep at night. I need answers.
What do you want answers to? What do you not know?
Why was there no security for him when they were supposed to have security? And the security that they did have was called back. It just, things do not add up, and I'm just told lies. Why don't they have answers by now? They've had plenty of time to come up with something other than the things that they have not told me.
Are you concerned at all that the hearings in Benghazi that has become a political issue, that Republicans have turned it into a political issue, that Democrats have turned it into a political issue, as opposed to it being a scandal and a tragedy apart from politics?
Of course it's political. That's the way it's been. That's how they're treating it. That's what they're doing with it. They're making it into something that, why don't they just do their job? They didn't do their job, and now they're hiding behind the word political and going from there.
You have expressed disappointment in the past because President Obama, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, all of them came to you, talked to you.
Yes.
And then you haven't heard from them. Have you heard from anybody in the Obama administration? Have you gotten any outreach or any answers at all?
I got one telephone call from a clerk that was a couple days after it happened. He was reading to me from the timeline, which I already had, and that was it. And since then, all they have told me is that I am not part of the immediate family, so they don't want to tell me anything.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified about the Benghazi tragedy shortly before she left office. I want to play a little bit of what she said.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator.
What was your reaction to that?
Well, that's what I want to know. Why did it happen? And she is in charge. Why couldn't she do something about it? I blame her.
You blame Secretary of State Clinton?
Yes.
Why?
Because that's her department. She's supposed to be on top of it, and yet she claims that she knows nothing. It wasn't told to her. Well, who is running the place?
I don't find it surprising that you haven't gotten answers, because I haven't either. And I've been reporting on this in September. But what I find so surprising is that there hasn't been any outreach other than that clerk. You would think that...
They don't want to talk to me because they're afraid of what I might say. Because I might say something like, who is at fault and why are they covering it up? And they are covering it up because I haven't heard any answers. And I don't think Hillary or any one of them want me to be talking the way I am. I don't think so, because they're not very happy. But I told every one of them personally, nose to nose. I said, just tell me what happened. Whisper in my ear if it's classified. And I won't tell anybody, but at least it'll put things to rest for me. But they won't do that. They won't talk to me. The only thing they'll tell me is that I am not a member of the immediate family. And I don't understand that, because I still remember the labor pains, which was quite a while ago. I think I'm a member of the immediate family, and I think I ought to know. And I think it would be very simple for them to say something. It wouldn't take very much.
Pat, I hope you find answers. Thanks for being here. God bless you.
So we have a review board. The review board finds 64 different things that we could change. A lot of them are common sense and should be done, but the question is, it's a failure of leadership that they weren't done in advance, and 4 lives were cost because of this. I'm glad that you're accepting responsibility. I think that ultimately with your leaving, you accept the culpability for the worst tragedy since 9/11, and I really mean that. Had I been president at the time, and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable. The thing is that, we can understand that you're not reading every cable. I can understand that maybe you're not aware of the cable from the ambassador in Vienna that asked for $100,000 for an electrical charging station. I can understand that maybe you're not aware that your department spent $100,000 on 3 comedians who went to India on a promotional tour called Make Chi Not War. But I think you might be able to understand and might be aware of the $80 million spent on a consulate in Mashar al-Sharif that will never be built. I think it's inexcusable that you did not know about this and that you did not read these cables. I would think by anybody's estimation, Libya has to have been one of the hottest of hot spots around the world. Not to know of the request for securities really, I think, cost these people their lives. Their lives could have been saved had someone been more available, had someone been aware of these things, more on top of the job. And the thing is I don't suspect you of bad motives. The review board said, well, these people weren't willfully negligent. I don't think you were willfully. I don't suspect your motives of wanting to serve your country, but it was a failure of leadership not to be involved. It was a failure of leadership not to know these things. And so I think it is good that you're accepting responsibility because no one else is. And there is a certain amount of culpability to the worst tragedy since 9/11, and I'm glad you're accepting this.
That there was no protest prior to this. I mean, this attack started at 9:40 p.m. Benghazi time, and it was an assault. I mean, I'm going back to then Ambassador Rice, 5 days later, going to the Sunday shows, and what I would say purposefully misleading the American public.
I certainly did not know of any reports that contradicted the IC talking points at the time that Ambassador Rice went on the TV shows. I certainly did not know of any reports that contradicted the IC talking points at the time that Ambassador Rice went on the TV shows.
This was a systemic breakdown of the State Department's security apparatus, and she ran the State Department. She should have known of the dangers that existed there. In fact, in a hearing we had here a year and a half ago, I asked her specifically about meetings she had with the Libyan government, in which she was made aware of the fact that many of these militias that were providing some of the perimeter security were unreliable and how dangerous Benghazi had become. The Brits had pulled out of Benghazi, the Red Cross had pulled out of Benghazi, the U.S. facility had already been previously targeted. So not only has she not been held responsible, no one has been held responsible. I believe 4 individuals were suspended with pay. All 4 have returned to work. Who made this decision not to have sufficient security? And are those types of decisions still being made? Those are valid inquiries, and she has to have some level of responsibility, because if she's going to brag about her time at the State Department, she also has to talk openly about their failures. We need to investigate it to understand what went wrong so that the people responsible for those decisions can be held accountable, and so that we can put in place measures so that it never happens again. That, to me, is a very valid inquiry. The State Department had at its disposal a steady stream of reporting about how dangerous and how much danger that facility in Benghazi was in. It is a fact that they did not take sufficient security measures, and it is a fact that perhaps they shouldn't have even been there, and it is a fact that they did not have an extraction plan in place that was sufficient. Who made that decision, and is that method of operating still in place now? Because Americans serving in Tripoli today in Libya are in similar danger. And I think those are legitimate inquiries, and if she thinks that's not something we should focus on, then perhaps that gives you some insight as to why this happened in the first place.
Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Glenn Doherty, and Tyrone Woods served this country with courage and with honor. And they were killed under circumstances that most of us could never imagine. Terrorists pour through the front gate of an American facility, attacking people and property with machine guns, mortars, and fire. It is important that we remember how these 4 men died. It is equally important that we remember how these 4 men lived and why. They were more than 4 images on a television screen. They were husbands and fathers and sons and brothers and family and friends. They were Americans who believed in service and sacrifice. Many people speak wistfully of a better world, but do little about it. These 4 went out and actually tried to make it better, and it cost them their lives. So we know what they gave us. What do we owe them? Justice for those that killed them. We owe their families our everlasting gratitude, respect. We owe them and each other the truth about why we were in Libya. The truth about what we were doing in Libya. The truth about the escalating violence in Libya before we were attacked and these 4 men were killed. the truth about requests for additional security, the truth about requests for additional personnel, the truth about requests for additional equipment, the truth about where and why our military was positioned as it was on the anniversary of 9/11, the truth about what was happening and being discussed in Washington while our people were under attack, the truth about what led to the attacks, and the truth about what our government told the American people after the attacks. Why were there so many requests for more security personnel and equipment, and why were those requests denied in Washington? Why did the State Department, compound and facility, not even come close to meeting proper security specifications? What policies were we pursuing in Libya that required a physical presence in spite of the escalating violence? Who in Washington was aware of the escalating violence? What precautions, if any, were taken on the anniversary of 9/11? What happened in Washington after the first attack, and what was our response to that attack? What did the military do or not do? What did our leaders in Washington do or not do, and when? Why was the American public given such divergent accounts of what caused these attacks? And why is it so hard to get information from the very government these four men represented, served, and sacrificed for? Even after an accountability review board and a half-dozen congressional investigations, these and other questions still lingered. And these questions lingered because previous investigations were not thorough. These questions lingered because those previous investigations were narrow in scope and either incapable or unwilling to access the facts and evidence necessary to answer all relevant questions. So the House of Representatives, including some Democrats, I hasten to add, asked this committee to write the final definitive accounting of what happened in Benghazi. Just last month, 3 years after Benghazi, top aides finally returned documents to the State Department. A month ago, this committee received 1,500 new pages of Secretary Clinton's emails related to Libya and Benghazi, 3 years after the attacks. And a little over 2 weeks ago, this committee received nearly 1,400 pages of Ambassador Stevens' emails, 3 years after the attacks. It is impossible to conduct a serious, fact-centric investigation without access to the documents from the former Secretary of State, the ambassador who knew more about Libya than anyone else, and testimony from witnesses who survived the attacks. Madam Secretary, I understand there are people, frankly, in both parties who have suggested that this investigation is about you. Let me assure you it is not, and let me assure you why it is not. This investigation is about 4 people who were killed representing our country on foreign soil. It is about what happened before, during, and after the attacks that killed them. It is about what this country owes to those who risk their lives to serve it. And it is about the fundamental obligation of government to tell the truth, always, to the people that it purports to represent.
There was never a video-inspired protest in Benghazi. There was in Cairo, but not in Benghazi. Victoria Nuland, your spokesperson at the State Department, hours after the attack said this: Benghazi has been attacked by militants. In Cairo, police have removed demonstrators. Benghazi, you got weapons and explosions. Cairo, you got spray paint and rocks. 1 hour before the attack in Benghazi, Chris Stevens walks the diplomat to the front gate. The ambassador didn't report a demonstration. He didn't report it because it never happened. An eyewitness in the command center that night on the ground said no protest, no demonstration. 2 intelligence reports that day. No protest, no demonstration. The attack starts at 3:42 Eastern Time, ends at approximately 11:40 p.m. that night. At 4:06, an ops alert goes out across the State Department. It says this: mission under attack, armed men, shots fired, explosions heard. No mention of a video, no mention of a protest, no mention of a demonstration. But the best evidence is Greg Hicks, the #2 guy in Libya, the guy who worked side by side with Ambassador Stevens. He was asked if there had been a protest, would the ambassador have reported it? Mr. Hicks' response? Absolutely. For there to have been a demonstration on Chris Stevens' front door and him not to have reported it is unbelievable, Mr. Hicks said. He said, secondly, if it had been reported, he would have been out the back door within minutes, and there was a back gate. Everything points to a terrorist attack. We just heard from Mr. Pompeo about the long history of terrorist incidents, terrorist violence in the country, and yet 5 days later, Susan Rice goes on 5 TV shows, and she says this: Benghazi was a spontaneous reaction as a consequence of a video. A statement we all know is false. But don't take my word for it. Here's what others have said. Rice was off the reservation on 5 networks, White House worried about the politics. Republicans didn't make those statements. They were made by the people who work for you in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau, the actual experts on Libya in the State Department. So, if there's no evidence for a video-inspired protest, then where'd the false narrative start? Started with you, Madam Secretary. At 10:08, on the night of the attack, you released this statement. Some have sought to justify the vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. At 10:08, with no evidence, at 10:08, before the attack is over, at 10:08, when Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty are still on the roof of the annex fighting for their lives, the official statement of the State Department blames a video.
Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior along with the protest that took place at our embassy in Cairo yesterday as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet.
It was interesting what else Ms. Newland said that day. She said, if pressed by the press, if there's a connection between Cairo and Benghazi, she said this: there's no connection between the two. So here's what troubles me. Your experts knew the truth. Your spokesperson knew the truth. Greg Hicks knew the truth. But what troubles me more is I think you knew the truth. I want to show you a few things here. You're looking at an email you sent to your family. Here's what you said. At 11 o'clock that night, approximately 1 hour after you told the American people it was a video, you say to your family, 2 officers were killed today in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group. You tell the American people one thing, you tell your family an entirely different story. Also, on the night of the attack, you had a call with the president of Libya. Here's what you said to him. Ansar al-Sharia is claiming responsibility. It's interesting, Mr. Katala, one of the guys arrested and charged, actually belonged to that group. And finally, and most significantly, the next day, within 24 hours, you had a conversation with the Egyptian Prime Minister. You told him this: we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest.
I certainly did not know of any reports that contradicted the IC talking points at the time that Ambassador Rice went on the TV shows.
Let me read that one more time. We know, not we think, not it might be, we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. State Department experts knew the truth. You knew the truth. But that's not what the American people got. And again, the American people want to know why.
I think if you look at what all of us were trying to do, and we were in a position, Congressman, of trying to make sense of a lot of incoming information and watch the way the intelligence community tried to make sense of it.
Madam Secretary.
So all I can say is nobody...
There was not conflicting information the day of the attack because your press secretary said, if pressed, there's no connection between Cairo and Benghazi. It was clear. You're the ones who muddied it up.
As you know, when this attack happened, the White House initially said it arose out of a spontaneous protest over an anti-Muslim video. That turned out not to be true, and the White House said they relied entirely on CIA talking points. But I have obtained 12 different versions of those talking points that shows that they were dramatically edited by the administration. Take a look at 2 of them. On the left, a draft initially written by the CIA. On the right, one that was used by the White House, the final version. What was taken out? all references to al-Qaeda and all references to CIA warnings before the attack about the terror threat in Benghazi.
So then, John, again, if this gains traction now, as they seem to be direct contradictions, how bad could this be for the State Department and its former head, Hillary Clinton?
Well, that remains to be seen. But, Josh, I have had emails read to me that show that many of these changes were directed by Hillary Clinton's spokesperson at the State Department, Victoria Nuland. In one email, she said that information about CIA warnings, quote, could be abused by members of Congress to beat up the State Department for not paying attention to warnings. So why would we want to feed that? After that email, all of those references were deleted.
Here's what I think's going on. Here's what I think's going on. Let me show you one more slide. Again, this is from Victoria Nuland, your press person. She says to Jake Sullivan and Philippe Reines, subject line reads this: Romney's statement on Libya. Email says this is what Ben was talking about. I assume Ben is the now somewhat famous Ben Rhodes, author of the Talking Points memo. This email is at 10:35, 27 minutes after your 10:08 statement. 27 minutes after you've told everyone it's a video, while Americans are still fighting because the attack's still going on, your top people are talking politics. Seems to me that night you had three options, Secretary. You could tell the truth, like you did with your family, like you did with the Libyan president, like you did with the Egyptian prime minister. Tell them it was a terrorist attack. You could say, you know what, we're not quite sure. Don't really know for sure. I don't think the evidence is there. I think it's all in the first one, but you could have done that. But you picked a third option. You picked the video narrative. You picked the one with no evidence, and you did it because Libya was supposed to be, as Mr. Roskin pointed out, this great success story for the Obama White House and the Clinton State Department. And a key campaign theme that year was GM's alive, bin Laden's dead, al-Qaeda's on the run. And now you have a terrorist attack. And it's a terrorist attack in Libya. And it's just 56 days before an election. You can live with a protest about a video. That won't hurt you. But a terrorist attack will. So you can't be square with the American people. You can tell your family it's a terrorist attack, but not the American people. You can tell the president of Libya it's a terrorist attack, but not the American people. And you can tell the Egyptian prime minister it's a terrorist attack, but you can't tell your own people the truth. Madam Secretary, Americans can live with the fact that good people sometimes give their lives for this country. They don't like it. They mourn for those families. They pray for those families. But they can live with it. But what they can't take, what they can't live with, is when their government's not square with them.
Breaking tonight, the Benghazi hearing has just wrapped up after about 11 hours of Hillary Clinton's testimony. In her discussions of this attack, Hillary Clinton has repeatedly called Ambassador Chris Stevens, who gave his life in Libya, a quote friend of hers. But on numerous occasions during her testimony today, Mrs. Clinton sounded a different note when it came to the ambassador. Our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, is live for us tonight with more. Catherine?
Thank you, Megan. Mrs. Clinton said Ambassador Stevens knew the risks, accepted the risks, and if he felt security was so poor, he knew how to get her.
Chris Stevens had an opportunity to reach me directly anytime he thought there was something of importance. The people with whom he worked, the people who were around him and with him, they very well understood the dangers that they were confronting.
Mrs. Clinton also testified today that she personally chose Chris Stevens, a career diplomat, to be her first point man for the Libyan opposition during the 2011 revolution, and then as her ambassador. And she spoke about the deep personal loss when he was murdered. Yet there is no record she spoke to him in the year leading up to the attack.
Did you ever personally speak to him after you swore him in May? Yes or no, please?
Yes, I believe I did. But
and when was that?
I don't recall.
Because there are no call logs with him. We have no record that you had any conversations with the ambassador after you swore him in and before he died, and you were his boss.
Fox News was first to report on September 17th, 6 days after the attack, that there was no protest at the consulate in Benghazi, and we took a lot of heat for that reporting, but stuck with it, and in the end, we were correct. Former Navy SEALs Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty were killed on the roof of the CIA annex during the third wave of the attack in a mortar strike, and when their bodies were brought back to the U.S., Woods' father met with Mrs. Clinton and took notes about what she promised him.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at my notes for quite some time, and before I came out here to Washington, D.C., I keep notes. This is like 2012. And I just decided I'd better look at the notes just to review exactly what she said, so I'd have the facts down. And let me just read what's written down here. It says, I gave Hillary a hug and shook her hand, and she said, we are going to have the filmmaker arrested who was responsible for the death of your son.
That mortar strike on the CIA annex is the smoking gun evidence that it was premeditated terrorism. 3 mortars struck the CIA in under 90 seconds, killing Woods and Doherty, and they were fired from more than a half-mile away. It was a professional hit that required training and planning. And yet Mrs. Clinton told the survivors, the family members, that she believed it was a video when her own records now show that she didn't believe a video had any connection to that terrorist attack, Abby.
Well, and Catherine Clinton also said yesterday during the hearing that there was never a recommendation to leave Benghazi.
Well, that's right. She testified that there was a certain level of comfort with the high threat level and that the operation there was never in jeopardy.
There was never a recommendation from any intelligence official in our government, from any official in the State Department, or from any other person with knowledge of our presence in Benghazi to shut down Benghazi.
But that statement is misleading because this classified cable, first obtained by Fox News, shows that there was an emergency meeting in Benghazi 3 weeks before the 2012 attack. And at that meeting, State Department and CIA personnel discussed suspending operations for the consulate and moving State Department personnel in with the CIA, where the security was much higher. It reads in part, quote, CIA suggested that mission personnel could co-locate to the annex if the security environment degraded suddenly. In the longer term, we believe former co-location with the CIA will greatly improve our security situation. The State Department was always reluctant to confirm that emergency meeting took place just 3 weeks before the attack and that it predicted the consulate could not withstand a coordinated assault. And that classified cable was one of the last documents provided to the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation that found the attack could have been prevented. We also learned today that there were 600 separate requests from Stevens and the group in Benghazi for additional security in that year leading up to the attack, but virtually nothing was done. And on the day of the assault, the terrorists walked in unencumbered, set fire, and killed Stevens and Sean Smith as well, Megan.
Wow. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Joining me now to react, Robert Zimmerman, a Clinton supporter and DNC committee member from New York. I mean, that is just... Why? Why were there 600 requests for security that were ignored? Why?
Megan,
Why is it not fair to ask those questions?
Megan, first, let me say to you, I'm not here as a Hillary Clinton supporter, even as a Democrat. I'm here as a proud American. And I think, like the polls show, an overwhelming number of our fellow citizens, along with Republicans in Congress, are just appalled by the partisan posturing of this committee and the partisan manipulation. Even Chairman Gowdy's own hand-picked investigator, a major in the Air Force, condemned this committee for their partisan manipulation.
All right, let me stop you there. Let's assume, for the purposes of this discussion, you're completely right, that this has been partisan from the beginning, that Trey Gowdy wants to hurt Hillary Clinton's poll numbers. He denies that. Kevin McCarthy said something that certainly suggested it was true in his view. Sure. But I'll give you that for the purposes of this discussion. How do you explain this email? All the investigations that preceded this, they didn't have this. She didn't turn it over. And after years of telling us, that it was about a video, and now we see on the night in question, it wasn't like she was just writing in her diary to the Egyptian prime minister, we know this attack had nothing to do with the film. It was planned and it wasn't a protest. Her own words.
It was clear from the earliest moments after that attack that everyone on the ground and everyone closest to that attack knew
almost instantly, that this was an organized effort, not part of a spontaneous uprising, and there was never, ever any evidence that it had anything to do with a video that was produced by some guy out in California. And for them to further that narrative and continue to do so well after it had become clear that that wasn't the case, it was unacceptable. The American people deserve better, and the families of those victims in Benghazi deserve better. Hillary Clinton lied about Benghazi. There's no doubt about that, Charlie. I mean, there are emails in which she was talking to her family, and she was telling them that there was an attack on that consulate that was due to a terrorist attack by al-Qaeda elements, and then she was going around the country talking to the families of the victims and to the American people and saying, no, no, this is because of some video. It was clear from the very early moments after that attack that it was not a spontaneous uprising. It was a planned attack, well orchestrated by people that brought armaments to that attack that you would never see as part of a spontaneous uprising. What was very clear is that from the very early moments of that attack, she knew that it was a terrorist attack, as she shared by email with various people. And yet she continued to perpetuate the lie.
If you're calling her a liar by saying she perpetuated a lie, then why do you think she did that? What was her motive?
Well, that's very clear why. Because they were in the middle of a 2012 re-election in which President Obama had made the claim that al-Qaeda was being defeated and on the run, and this counteracted that narrative.
You were saying, Senator, that Hillary Clinton lied because she wanted to help Barack Obama in his re-election campaign. That's a serious charge.
Yes. Is that... Well, it's the truth. I mean, that's not only why she did it, that's why everyone in the administration did it. The narrative of their campaign at the time, Charlie, was that al-Qaeda was on the run and had been defeated. That was their narrative. And this countered that narrative. They didn't want that out there, and that's why they didn't tell the truth about what truly happened.
Why did she lie, or how did she lie, as you put it, about Benghazi? Where was her lie?
Okay, so it's very clear from all the data. It's very clear from the data. It's very clear from the emails that the President of the United States, that the Secretary of State, and that the military understood that this was a purposeful terrorist attack on the anniversary of 9/11, and they understood it while it was going on. So tell me then, why would you talk about the next day from the State Department? Why would you talk about a video? Why would you explain that this is not America? Why would you stand over the bodies of the fallen and say it again? Why not come out and say, this was a purposeful terrorist attack on our embassy. 4 brave Americans were killed, and we are going to seek retribution.
Let's go through this. Hillary Clinton says in a press conference recently, oh, I'm eager to turn over all the emails so the American people can see. Well, now we know the State Department hasn't turned over all the emails. We also know those emails link Hillary Clinton and the State Department for the first time to the Susan Rice talking points, that this was all a video and a demonstration. Do you remember? We now know on the night of September 11th, the State Department and the White House knew this was a pre-planned terrorist attack. 2 days later, Hillary Clinton stands over the bodies of the fallen and talks about a video. Susan Rice goes on television and says it's a video, it's a demonstration. Hillary Clinton later denies that she had anything to do with those talking points. False. She never revealed a private server in her basement until it was discovered. And then, when it was discovered, she wipes it clean nearly 2 years after she leaves the Department of State. Listen to the litany I just went through. Really? I turned over all the emails? No, I didn't. I had nothing to do with the talking points? Yes, you did. It was a video and a demonstration. Turns out it was a pre-planned terrorist attack. I didn't tell anyone I had a private server. I didn't tell anyone I had a private email account, but when you found it out, I wiped it clean. I think we now have enough information to understand that Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, has engaged in gross dereliction of duty. She has engaged in a cover-up, and she has blood on her hands.
The U.S. pulled out of Benghazi, and al-Qaeda has grown in power across Libya. When a member of our team went to the U.S. compound, he found remnants of the Americans' final frantic moments still scattered on the ground. Among them, Ambassador Stevens' official schedule for September 12, 2012, a day he didn't live to see.
September 11, 2012. An American ambassador is brutally murdered. 3 other Americans killed. An organized assault with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. A security request submitted 4 months earlier, denied, even after 2 bombings preceding the anniversary of 9/11. And fears of being killed expressed by Ambassador Stevens himself. Yet President Obama's officials insisted they had no actionable intelligence requiring increased security. Then, the attack. And Obama and his administration wouldn't call it terrorism for 14 days. For political reasons, it was in Obama's interest to not portray the attack as terrorism on the anniversary of 9/11. The intelligence was there, clear signs of terrorism, but campaign politics came first. Within hours of the attacks, Obama officials received numerous intelligence reports indicating the attacks were organized and Al-Qaeda was involved. Communications intercepted between Al-Qaeda and Libyan militants bragging about the attack. Every sign pointed to terrorism. But for 2 long weeks, Obama and his team blamed a video.